All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for your time this evening. First off, I think on behalf of Jason, Ray, and myself, we would like to thank you because I think we've all had long days. And the fact that you're back in front of your computer, or hopefully not still at your computer this whole time for the day, that it means a lot to us that you're taking time. So we want to make sure it's worth your while. And if you have any questions, we'll do our best to answer them. If for any reason we can't answer any of the questions, then we can always take it offline. So happy to do so. So I'm covering Stealthwatch for the first half, and Ray will be covering SecureX to kind of tie it all back together. So Stealthwatch, I would say, is probably one of my favorite acquisitions in the security architecture that Cisco has made. I've had the opportunity to, have multiple roles within Cisco in the past, many years that I've been here, both generalist and specialist roles, and I've kind of kept track of them. Right now, both Ray and I cover the breadth of the Cisco portfolio, so we get a chance to touch everything. So because we get that broad view into the entire portfolio, we see some really cool things. So Stealthwatch came in, I think it was maybe 5+ years ago. Don't quote me on that, but that was under the Landcope acquisition. And so what Landcope did, they had a product called Stealthwatch, which was around behavioral analytics to identify, behavior, a baseline, and what is normal, and then identifying deviation from normal, which to me is really cool because everything, for a lot of us in network monitoring tools and even security tools are very binary. It's either, benign or it's malicious, or, we've identified a threat or we haven't identified a threat, right? Where Stealthwatch is kind of looking at the behavior, which I think in terms of what the industry is doing is kind of the direction, right? AI and ML. So Stealthwatch was really forward-thinking in what they were doing, and I'm glad that we picked them up. The one thing that I'm probably not as excited about is that there's an effort on rebranding Stealthwatch to what I highlighted here in yellow, which is scalable visibility and security analytics. It's well above my pay grade, but I think Stealthwatch was a great name. It rolls off the tongue really well. So for the purpose of our conversation.
Are you serious? Is that true?
Yes, that is true.
Wow.
If it is not true, I hope I'm wrong, but everything that I've seen so far, everything I see so far is scalable visibility and security analytics, AKA Stealthwatch. So I think they're looking at moving away from that. I don't know why, but there's a reason behind it. I just don't know what it is. But yeah, so, for the purpose of our conversation, we'll use Stealthwatch. It's going to save you and me some effort. But Stealthwatch is, focused around visibility. And I think we would all agree, right, that security hinges on visibility, right? So being knowledgeable and having the tools in place to identify what's connected to the network, where it is, what it's doing, and who's behind that particular device are all really important pieces of information. And so we tie that together with Stealthwatch, and I'll explain how we do that. The other thing that Stealthwatch is focused on doing is seeing every conversation. So whether it's east-west traffic or north-south, we see every source and every destination from an endpoint. And that's really, really powerful because for compliance reasons, for audit reasons, because you have a record of every conversation, you can do a lot of powerful things with that, and I'll get into that too. So yeah, you can't protect what you can't see, so having this visibility is huge. And then as I mentioned, kind of the key pillar or key components of Stealthwatch is understanding what is normal, and I'll tell you right now that is really hard to do because every environment is very unique. Even from one branch to another branch of a single organization, it's hard to define what is normal. So they've got their work cut out for them at Stealthwatch, but there's a lot of effort and resources behind them that make it possible. And they've got the algorithms down, and they continue to get better. The other one is, the network is a very powerful tool. It is a sensor for all intents and purposes. So being able to, identify when you have an issue from the information that was gathered and then being able to respond to that threat quickly is very powerful. So one aspect of the network is that it's a sensor, every endpoint in the network is a sensor or can be a sensor. And then at the same point, every component of the network, whether it's the access layer, switching, or wireless, or from the firewall, or from the routing perspective, these are all areas where we can work on mitigating threats, right? So we have every endpoint is a sensor, and every point can also be an enforcer. So really powerful. Now with COVID and everything that's been happening, right? I think every organization is has a different stance and is at a different point, whether their users are on-premise or roaming or off-premise. So the good thing is that Stealthwatch, while it's focused heavily on being on-premise, we also have a really great informer on the endpoint, which is AnyConnect. So if you have AnyConnect in place, you can generate IP fix information, which can be gathered by Stealthwatch to identify the malicious behavior, whether you're on campus or off campus, right? So we extend that capability with Stealthwatch. And the same thing is true for the cloud, which we'll get into. So there are two paths to take with Stealthwatch. I will say Stealthwatch Enterprise is where the lion's share of the features are. If you're looking at checkboxes, Stealthwatch Enterprise pretty much has them all. Stealthwatch Cloud is really, technically speaking, part of an acquisition that Cisco made called Observable Networks, which was focused on public cloud monitoring. So, VPC flow information, all that kind of stuff can be gathered into Stealthwatch Cloud. Stealthwatch Cloud is ramping up to getting on the enterprise feature set. And Stealthwatch Cloud, just because it's cloud doesn't mean that it's only focused on, AWS, Azure, whatever public cloud you're in. There's also a private network monitoring aspect to that on-premise as well. So, personally, if I were to read between the lines and looking at the roadmaps and so forth, I think there's a lot of emphasis on getting Stealthwatch Cloud to the same level of functionality as Stealthwatch Enterprise, which has been the mainstay for a long time, right, being on-premise. It's not uncommon, and it is very, possible that customers will have both because, a lot of organizations are looking and have been looking or already making the move or have made the move into, kind of a hybrid approach for on-prem and public cloud. It just makes a lot of sense. So you can have both. It's not just have one or the other. And they both can aggregate information together for you. So this is not something that I'm going to go through line by line, but it is for your information, and we will make this available to everyone. But you can see here the differences between Stealthwatch Enterprise and Stealthwatch Cloud and what is roadmapped items as well. So good information to have, Andrew. Is there a question? Maybe that was just some background noise. Apologies. Okay, so I mentioned earlier, every endpoint within the network is a sensor. So there's a lot of valuable data that is generated from the network. Now, is every organization taking advantage of all that data? The likelihood is more likely not. Just because there's so much data, and a lot of times you can collect it, but if you're not doing anything with that data, it doesn't serve you any good, and it's kind of a waste, right? So the great thing about Stealthwatch is that we are collecting that information that a lot of times would have either not been collected in the first place, or if it was collected, it may have been used for different purposes. So take, for example, NetFlow, right, which is a very powerful source of information to look at application health monitoring, to look at a lot of information into, just overall application utilization and so forth. But you can also take another perspective with that same set of data to look at behavioral analytics and identify, malicious behavior, whether it's a command and control or data exfiltration, reconnaissance, what have you. All of that data, right, is very, very valuable. And there's what I would consider, you would call it metadata that we can capture without having to do like an SSL or TLS, anything like that for a decrypt. So you still keep your PII, you still keep your data integrity for privacy, and we don't have to decrypt anything to know whether something is malicious or not. And, as you know, I think there's so many stats on how how much is encrypted now versus how much was encrypted, a few years ago. Everything's moving towards encryption. Our applications that are being hosted by us, I think some organizations are moving from older versions of TLS to later versions of TLS. Either they've already done that or they're in the progress of doing that, right? So all of this is happening, but at the same time, the threats that are coming in are also becoming encrypted or have been encrypted, which makes it harder to identify, right? So thankfully, because of the metadata that the network generates from switches, from routers, wireless access points, controllers, firewalls, can all be consumed by Stealthwatch, and then we can do something with that data, and I'll go over that. I would say NetFlow is probably the most dominant source of information that Stealthwatch works with, but there are other sources of information as well, and it's not all, NetFlow is very Cisco, specific, but whether it's IPFix or JFlow or SFlow, we can capture that too and outside of Cisco. So it's not, Stealthwatch, when you think of Stealthwatch and everything that I'm talking to you about today, it's not specific to Cisco. It could work with a multi-vendor environment. It just happens to be that the way that Cisco has set up NetFlow and the encrypted traffic analytics that we have in our products means that metadata that we derive, there's a lot more granularity in that information, which gives a lot more visibility into things that I'll explain here in a minute. But a good example of metadata is when you take a photo with your mobile device, whatever it is, that photo that was taken will have the date and time, the GPS coordinates for the location for XY, the ISO, the aperture, the type of device that took the photo. There's a ton of information, right? So that's the kind of example that we can take with the metadata for every flow that happens within the network. If you have a portion of the network that is not Cisco or is not capable of generating NetFlow or IPFix or anything like that, or even older Cisco, you can deploy what's called a flow sensor, which you would essentially then create a span port for that particular device. And then we can capture information from that span port into the flow sensor and do DPI, deep-packet inspection, and generate IPFix for that information to go to the flow collector. So it can work in pretty much any environment. And the next thing is, you may already be using NetFlow for your own application health monitoring or going into prime infrastructure or DNA center or what have you. But there's a certain limit to how many NetFlow exports you can do from a particular device, and maybe you've already reached that limit. There's something called the UDP Gateway, which allows you to take that NetFlow export, come into the UDP Gateway, and then the UDP Gateway can send it out to that NetFlow untouched to a SIM, to Prime, to DNA Center, to whatever tool you may have that also needs NetFlow. So that UDP Gateway is something that you can use in that type of environment. So there was this big push in the industry with the, back in 2017 with the Catalyst 9K portfolio called Encrypted Traffic Analytics, also known as ETA for the acronym. So as I mentioned, there's some additional information that we can capture that not every network endpoint can capture or we're set up to capture, such as the initial data packet information, right? So even though a particular flow, right, from source to destination will be encrypted, not everything is encrypted in that information, right? Things like IP header, TCP header, part of the IDP, there's a lot of things that are available to capture, which we can look at and then start to look at things like the sequence of packet lengths and times to identify malicious behavior. So we know, right, that this sort of behavior and this sort of timing between packets sent and packets received from a source and destination, that this is the signs of something that's malicious, could be data exfiltration or what have you, right? So it comes down to visibility, right? If you don't have something available to be inspected, then you're glossing over that, and that's important source of information, right? So the Cat 9K, the ISR 4Ks, obviously the Cat 8Ks now will do it. Cisco access points, controllers, routers, they all can generate encrypted traffic analytics, which is here. So this is just one example, right? And this kind of comes back to machine learning, right? So we can say, well, we've seen this before, and we know that this is malicious, and so we can start to raise alerts and allow the network security team or the IT team to take action on that. And the way this is possible, obviously, you know, with the cloud, right? The benefit of, I think, Cisco, and I mean, in my opinion, right, I think Cisco is in the best position to be, you know, one of the strongest security companies because we've got the most, you know, proliferated network out there. So everything can provide information, and we can take that information, and with acquisitions like Cognitive and our Talos group can take that information. We've got, I think it's like 300 researchers that are, you know, looking at identifying new threats every day, and then being able to protect every endpoint, right, with something that was found in the UK at night, and then be protected for other places around the world because of that one threat that we saw, right? That's the power of the cloud and the power of Cognitive as well. So here's an example of, you know, the IDP and the sequence of packets and the timings and so forth, and like a flow, right? So you see a client here on the left, and you've got a server on the right, and you see the packets that were sent, the sequence in which they were sent, the duration it took to send them without having to inspect it. We don't have to know what's being sent per se, but the sequence can give us a lot of information. And this is the behavioral modeling that Stealthwatch does to identify, okay, this is the exhibited behavior for a Google search, right? So that's good. And this is the behavior for what would be the initiate on a command and control and so forth. So you can see, because of that information being reported, we can do something about it and then take action. I'll go over what the actions are in a minute. The required components at the most basic level to enable Stealthwatch in any environment is really four things. One, you need to license for the flows. I personally, and you know, I know this is being recorded, but I personally am not a fan of the way it's licensed because I think it's really hard to derive how many licenses or how many flows you need in a given environment. Although I will say the swag that I've used for the past few years has worked out pretty well statistically, and that is essentially looking at every endpoint with 6 to 8 flows on average. It's kind of an okay swag to use, but that could vary. The mileage will vary by environment for sure. So while I'm not a fan of that, that's how granular they are, and maybe that's how they keep the prices where they are, because you're licensing by flows, and if they license by endpoint, you know, like a laptop could take a lot more flows than like an IP phone, right? So maybe licensing that way makes it more cost effective. I don't know. It's, again, out of my pay grade, but it is a little bit challenging to license or to know how many flows you need. But there's a tool that you can use, and it can give you a good indicator for how many flows you need to license. So you need the flow rate license at the minimum, and then you need a flow collector, which can be a VM. The flow collector really is a workhorse in Stealthwatch. This is what's going to collect all of the net flow information, the S-flow, or whatever you have to provide into the flow collector. And this will then, you know, identify the threats and then aggregate that information up into the actual management console for Stealthwatch, which are the 3, you know, required components for Stealthwatch. And then obviously underlaying that, I mentioned that there's actually 4. You need the network equipment that could generate the information here, such as NetFlow or S-flow or whatever. So those are really the key components. And I mentioned a few minutes ago, you have also the UDP director optional, which, you know, is an additional component if you need it in your environment. And then the flow sensor as well for devices that do not generate NetFlow or IPFix. So that's, you know, the required core components at a minimum. So this slide, the real thing I wanted to drive home here is a couple of things. One is encrypted traffic analytics is kind of a big deal because it gives you that IDP information, the sequence length of packets and so forth. So that when you hear ETA, I know it's a big marketing thing, but there's actually a lot of weight behind that in terms of what Stealthwatch can do with that information. That additional metadata, granular information goes a long, long way. And, you know, Stealthwatch itself, if you just deploy Stealthwatch, it's purely a sensor. It takes no action. It can't do anything other than alert you of where you may have some malicious behavior or where you've positively identified malware or ransomware or something along those lines, like a Trojan. So that is what Stealthwatch does on its own. However, when paired with the Identity Services Engine, which is, you know, it's a Swiss Army knife, really, but it's your authentication server. For those of you who may have not had hands-on experience with the Identity Services Engine, I'm sure everyone's heard of it by now. But, you know, Identity Services Engine connects via LDAP to your Active Directory. And so because we're actually authenticating the actual users on the network, we know, you know, who's in the network. We know what device they're on because ICE also can profile that device and say, well, AJ's coming in via a MacBook, right? And I connected at this time, right? And I have this IP address. So we can derive, you know, information about that endpoint, that host, and then give that information to Stealthwatch via pxGrid. So within ICE, there's a checkbox that says pxGrid. So you can actually enable pxGrid on your ICE deployment, and pxGrid essentially allows information sharing. So it's a two-way road. So we share that host information, the profile, and the user to Stealthwatch. So Stealthwatch is not just going to report an IP address now. And a source IP and a destination IP, we're actually profiling. So we can tell you it was AJ that connected in. So, so let me give you just one example because it works well for me in my head. But let's just say, you know, I'm AJ. I connected into the corporate environment at 9 a.m. Right? I was, you know, working. Everything was going great, but Stealthwatch noticed that, you know, there was large amounts of data being sent out. So it could be some type of data exfiltration happening. Whether I knew about it or not, Stealthwatch can identify that in real time. And, you know, when I came into the network at 9 a.m., when I authenticated to the Identity Services Engine, there was an ACL, a DACL that was pulled down from ICE, if you set it up that way, right? Which said that, you know, maybe I was part of engineering and I had access to these resources, right? So whatever that, you know, DACL was, we can do a change of authorization when Stealthwatch identifies that there's something malicious and it's been positively identified. So we send, essentially it's a port bounce, it's a logical port bounce. It's called a change of authorization in AAA. And we send a new DACL, a new access list that could be a quarantine, a predefined ACL that could say, well, this is a quarantine VLAN, this goes nowhere. And now it gives an opportunity for IT to go and, you know, investigate further, or security team to investigate further on what happened with that endpoint. So that's some of what is possible with Stealthwatch when paired with the Identity Services Engine. You know, many customers have just deployed Stealthwatch, and I've got, you know, some customers, some organizations that integrate with ICE. There is a bit of a learning curve of getting them connected together. I think the first step is whether you've got ICE deployed, right? Because ICE in itself is a bit of a hurdle, but once you get there, the value is tremendous, right? ICE can do so much when deployed properly, and so that's one of the things that's possible with Stealthwatch plus ICE. So yeah, you know, kind of a big deal on the encrypted traffic analytics side on what's possible with that. But again, anything that can derive information we can pull from and you'll gain value from. A few years ago, we would do Stealthwatch assessments. It was really popular because Stealthwatch is not intrusive. It's gathering information. It's really, I wouldn't say easy, but it's actually not a huge lift to get NetFlow sent to the flow collectors and the VMs stood up to start looking at your organization, looking at, you know, the network traffic, the connections that are going back and forth, source and destination. And then, you know, maybe you uncover that maybe SMB today is strictly supposed to be between, host and the data center, right? Endpoints and the data center. And there shouldn't be any SMB from like endpoint to endpoint, right? So because you have that visibility, you can start to glean that information. The same thing is, we start identifying IP addresses and where those IP addresses are coming from, and start to identify connections from a particular endpoint to maybe other countries that aren't typically normal for your organization to communicate with. So these are the kind of bits of information that you can gather. Stealthwatch can be run in this mode pre-deployment, and just start to give you information that I think is really valuable. So it's good to to try out if you haven't, and I wouldn't say it's too terrible to get set up either. I will do my best to demo, but like Ray said, that our demo servers are publicly shared, so sometimes changes happen on them, and we sometimes don't get notified, or actually we never get notified when something happens. So I'm going to share a couple of slides that are snapshots of what you can see in case we can't see it in the demo when I go to do it. So here's an encrypted traffic analytics example. I didn't do a good job with the snapshot here, so I apologize. But over here, just imagine this is the host. And here, there's a number, a value of 10. So this is 100% confidence that we've identified malware for this particular endpoint. And so on the left, here's the host, or I'm sorry, the endpoint. And we see that because we got the information from ICE, that this is actually Rolanda. We got that profile information as well. It's a Windows machine, or coming from Windows, the IP address. We see the date range for when this occurred. And then we see all the different domains and the IP address countries with the flags and so forth. And then in the demo, you can actually hover over and see the country too if you don't know all the flags. I definitely don't. And then look at all the connections made through that one host. So again, we're logging every connection, and we're also looking back in time so we can start to correlate really important bits of information. Here's some further information when we go to look at, so you saw here this particular malware, right? So on the next window, we actually drilled down on that particular malware to see if it's affecting any other users. So in this case, we found that it's 7 other users, all on Windows devices. And then globally, because we're able to gather information, we can see that globally, not just within your organization, that it's impacting 20 plus users, 5 different companies, right? Within your organization, you can see information as to what about this particular threat, right? This particular Trojan. Information here on what it does, and good bits that you'd want to know, right? The other one is the affected users. So if it is impacting others, who are the others that are being impacted? So you get that information as well. And then we can see how this particular malware was identified within the environment. And obviously, when something gets into the environment, it may not be doing what it's supposed to, doing what it's intended to do right away. It may have some time on the network. It may do some reconnaissance. It may do things that don't actually show up right until a few days later when it actually may be executing its commands. So we can see here that initially it started out as whatever 7, and then it went to 8, and then the severity, as we positively identified it, and went to a 10 here, right? So we can see all of that information. Stealthwatch can do a lot of things. I don't think I'm doing it justice right now, and I'm also not a specialist on Stealthwatch, but this is a very good slide that you can keep for your own reference point to identify the different use cases for Stealthwatch. So I mentioned a couple, right? Obviously, threat detection is an important one, but compliance is another. If I were to ask some organizations today, like, can you tell me if you have anything in your environment that's like, older versions of TLS, that'd be probably pretty hard to find out, right? It's not very easy to capture that information unless you have the right tools in place. So we can identify if there's older versions of TLS. Maybe there's a an organizational-wide requirement that you're moving to TLS 1.2 or what, whatever, some other versions that that you want to be off of and you want to get away from. So you can actually identify that for compliance purposes within Stealthwatch. So there's a lot of aspects into this, including forensics and other things that can be valuable for why to deploy Stealthwatch. So there's a link here that you can actually download the use case menu as well.
Hey, AJ, I was just going to add one thing to that on a use case that I heard of that I hadn't thought about that was published was the visibility you gain if you are a company that might be acquiring another company and you're trying to ascertain, what are the hosts in that network, trying to map it out and get a good understanding of it before you merge the two. That you could deploy Stealthwatch to gain a lot of insight into that organization. I thought that was a pretty good way to leverage it in a real business value way.
Yeah, great point. Thanks, Ray. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Acquisitions are really, really challenging. So mergers, acquisitions, great point. All right, so I'm going to go into the demo. I was going to just share this slide here. So for any of you that haven't seen SecureX, I don't want to take any thunder away from Ray's portion, but Stealthwatch does tie into SecureX, which is a great, it's a free tool if you've got Cisco security products to tie information in and kind of aggregate that all together. But yeah, Ray will cover that.
I have zero thunder left. I have zero thunder left.
No, sorry. So this is the crypto compliance reporting I was mentioning, right? So what versions of TLS are present in the environment and so forth, so you can capture that very easily. Okay, so we'll go into the demo. Give me 1 second. Yeah, I've got too many windows open. Oh, okay, here we go. All right. Okay, so I'm already logged into Stealthwatch in the console. Usually here, so I'll start from the top, okay? When you look at the top of the dashboard when you log in for any Stealthwatch console that's already running, you'll see these top, I would say top alarms, if you will, for your organization that are ones that I like because it's not like giving you information overload. It's aggregating information. And so, for example, if there's like 1,000 connections that are coming from a host, we're not, inundating someone with 1,000 alarms, right? We're actually showing the host information here. So if there's any concern index or, a distributed denial of service, we're actually telling you which hosts are impacted, how many hosts are impacted. So that's great in terms of not giving you too much information. And then you can always hover over any of these areas to identify what these kind of acronyms are, right? Data hoarding, reconnaissance, command and control, or this is actually concern index, not CC. So you can get all of that by the actual host information. If ICE is actually plugged in properly here, then you'd get actually the context of the user information, right? So this is something that's unfortunately not working in my demo today, so I apologize for that. And then you can see your top applications, both outbound and inbound. And then here you can see all the alarms for the day. And you can just hover over and see what they are, and you can drill down on each one of these if you wanted to and see what these actually alarms are or where they're coming from. For the purpose of what I wanted to show and the time that we have, I'll do the cognitive threat analytics because this ties back into ETA. But the host that I normally would go to was Dustin, but Dustin is missing today. So the demo is going to just give me this IP address. So I apologize for that.
What's the difference between data hoarding and data exfiltration?
Good question. I don't know if I have a good answer for you, to be honest. I don't know, but I could find out. unless anyone does.
I think one way to look at it might be what might be just leaving the organization, right? So from an exfiltration perspective, where data hoarding could be more of a data loss prevention, someone's plugging in a USB key to a machine and downloading a bunch of data, where the other one could potentially be a machine in North Korea or Pakistan that has gained access and is taking data. That would be my guess.
Okay. Well, let's take that as an action item because I want to know now too. I don't think I have a good answer, so I don't think I'll try to give you an answer on that, but we can find out. Good to know.
And there's another alarm category. It says concern index versus target index. Are you familiar with that? Under alarm.
Concern index?
Alarming hosts, is it concern index and then target index? You know what the difference is there?
I don't have all of those committed to memory, to be honest.
Okay.
So good question, but we can find out. I think that's an important question, so thanks for asking. So unfortunately, when I go to this particular host, it's not actually generating information in the dashboard, so I do apologize for that. So we'll probably skip this. Maybe I can just randomly pick another one and see if it populates the data. But really what I wanted to show was just a couple of things, just the connections that are coming from the host and where the connections are terminated. So source and destination, right, for a particular host, and then identifying, right, if there are any alarms for this particular host, what are those, right? So we've got data hoarding, data exfiltration. We'll get you the definitions on specifically on what those are and how Stealthwatch looks at those. And then here we can see, again, because we're actually taking a record of every conversation, we can look at every flow and look at the timestamp and then look at the target host group, look at how much traffic was actually sent as well. So all of that information can be derived here, right? Observed 3.47 gigs. And so we can set thresholds in the dashboard as well. So maybe for one environment, right, moving 6 gigs a day is pretty normal, but for another, it may not, right? So you can also define thresholds for what is normal for your environment. So I do apologize for the demo not populating properly with the host name and all the other bits of information, but thank you so much for allowing me to share with you what I had for the few minutes that we had together. Ray, I'll go ahead and pass it over to you.
Hold on. So there was a question, AJ, around, and I was trying to Google it while you were talking, around the support for Stealthwatch in a virtual desktop environment.
Okay.
So I don't know if you have that or if you want to maybe take that as an action item while I'm speaking.
Yeah, got it. Good question.
Cool.
I'll take that as an action item. Thanks, Ray.
Not a problem.
And do we know who asked that question? Just so I can make sure we get the information.
That was Charlie? Yeah.
That was Charlie.
Charlie, okay. And was Charlie, I'm sorry, I was not paying attention. Were you the one who also asked about data hoarding versus data exfiltration? No? Okay.
I think that was someone named Kent. Was that Kent?
Yes, that was me.
Okay. Jason, do we have Kent's email address?
Kent, I don't know if I have your email address, but I'll give you mine and you can send me your email address so that AJ can follow up with you directly.
He changed your name.
That's kind of cool.
He changed
a bit of an upgrade.
There's no upgrading you, AJ. You're already at the top, buddy.
Sorry. So Kent, I'm sorry. Did we have your email?
No, I guess Kent's gonna email the question to.
Jason?
Yeah.
Apologies. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I do apologize for that. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Kent, for those questions. Sorry I didn't have an answer for you, but we'll get you an answer.
Awesome. So AJ stole, I'm going to go on video just for my monologue here because AJ did steal a little bit of my thunder. I have a little bit left. So, so what I'm going to be talking about and actually demonstrating for you guys is a product named SecureX. And to kind of give you an idea of what SecureX was born of, I would want to take a little bit of a walk down memory lane in terms of where Cisco has gone with security as a practice and as a company, and where we see ourselves. So I got to Cisco in 2015, which was probably a few months right after the Stealthwatch acquisition, or the Landcope Stealth acquisition of the product Stealthwatch. But if you take a look back from now back through, call it 2011, Cisco has been on an outright tear to bolster our security products. And by that, I mean, not only, the firewalling that started with PIX, but they started taking a look around and saying, hey, you know what, I think we can do some really interesting things based off of some of the products that we have that kind of span the horizon around security, right? Starting from a network operations tool that kind of blends itself towards security. So when we look at segmentation with ICE, when we look at what we were doing with the firewall, we made a lot of different acquisitions, starting back to Ironport, and so forth. We come full circle, call it 2019. Cisco's got a wealth of security products, some of them best in class when we look at our acquisitions of OpenDNS, when we look at our acquisition of the Snort IPS engine that now powers our firepower boxes for next generation firewall. So there was a lot of good things going on. The evolution of our advanced malware protection that rides on both the endpoint as well as the firewall, as well as in our cloud security. And what we found was no longer were customers just, deploying one piece of security from Cisco. We now had customers that said, hey, you know what? We like ICE for the segmentation. I like OpenDNS. That makes it really easy to secure my footprint at the edge. I see some value in Stealthwatch. And what we found is they started buying multiple products. And on average, I would say, a good Cisco security customer probably is in that 3 to 4 product range. We're not trying to be everything to everyone. We understand that this world is definitely a best of breed, but we had some really compelling products, both from the standpoint of efficacy, from the standpoint of cost in comparison to some of our competitors. And we came up with a new way to bundle them together that made it more cost efficient to consume more Cisco products. And that was in the evolution of our enterprise agreements that are probably about 2.5 years they're 2.5 years old right about now. And security was the first architecture business unit that actually had enterprise agreements. They led the way because they had the breadth of product line that made it valuable to do so. With that became a lot of questions to Cisco in terms of, hey, you know what? I'm using Stealthwatch, I'm using Umbrella, I'm using ICE. And oh, by the way, I love how these products talk together. So I can share information from firepower to ICE. ICE can do great things in terms of profiling the device and actually changing authorization. Oh, by the way, I can also send information from Stealthwatch to ICE. Oh, I can send information from AMP to firepower and make convictions on files that maybe entered into my my network 7 days ago. So there was this really good homogeneous view of the security products. But the one constant that was an irritant to most of my really good customers was they say, hey, you know what? I'm getting tired of this console, right? I'm in Stealthwatch. then I have to go to AMP, then I have to go to Umbrella. And oh, by the way, they're all different, right? So there's no commonality between the two. I need a way to kind of visualize this in a single dashboard. And so for the longest, there was this, hey, are you guys going to buy Splunk? Hell no, Splunk's way too expensive. Are you guys going to buy QRadar and all these other things? And what are you guys going to do to help with that? You know, Cisco gets a lot of flack for what we buy and we innovate on top of, but SecureX was really born from Cisco internally to solve a problem that our customers were having with our security products, which was the ability to start in one place and take information to the next and see it all together. And one of the things that Cisco did that I thought was very genius, they said, hey, we recognize that you guys are spending great money to be a Cisco customer in our security products. We're going to give you this for free. And so there was born SecureX. And SecureX really serves to be the single pane of glass, not for administration, but for visibility, the ability to customize your visibility amongst the Cisco portfolio, as well as third parties using APIs, as well as a way to bring different consoles together. And I'll show you that. So let me stop my video and let me go directly into my presentation. Hey, AJ, you guys seeing that presentation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Looks good.
So I know that there probably will be a lot of questions, and I don't think we can answer them all. But if you have any questions, you can feel free to email me. I don't have a problem answering my emails, and if I can answer it, I will. If I can't, I'll go to the product team and I'll get the answers from them. So moving forward. So believe it or not, this slide deck is 233 slides. And I'm only going to give you like 7 of them. So we're going to do the bulk of this in the demonstration area so that you can see it in action versus look at it on slides. But I'll give you the high level overview first, and then we can jump into that. So like I said earlier, Cisco was really tasked with solving some problems that our most loyal security product customers were having. And that was around the simplicity, right? You know, they wanted a way to have a turnkey platform that they can work within that encompass all these different products that actually shared information, which when you think about it is not a wild idea, right? It just seems in this day and age that a company with so many different products would find a way to normalize that data and bring it to one spot to make it easier to consume. And that was really the crux of the gripe was I'm consuming information in Umbrella, which is formerly OpenDNS. I'm consuming information in Stealthwatch. I'm consuming information in Firepower. How do I stitch this all together? And so that was the first piece. And then the other piece was visibility. When you are using multiple managers, multiple consoles, it becomes hard to visualize everything that's going on. And like I said earlier, stitch it together, because one thing we know about security threats, it's all about the time to detect and the time it takes to investigate to actually mitigate the threat. And so we needed a way to take all these great products that had lots of contextual information about what they were seeing in certain parts of the network and to bring them together so that not only could you see everything that one person or one product was seeing, but you could share it with another you can share with another product and ask it, hey, I've got this SHA-256 hash file and AMP on a file. What do you know about it, Umbrella? Can you tell me what you might know about this file since it came in through the outside? So that's kind of what we're doing with the visibility. And then with all of that becomes a more efficient process. So a process where you can begin an investigation in one product, call it AMP, call it Umbrella. You can then save that information that you're investigating. You can then easily carry that same information with you to the next product that you might be investigating that piece of information, whether it's firepower or something like that. That's where SecureX comes into play.
And challenging, right? To stitch that all together because they're all acquisitions. So
exactly,
built these from the ground up. Yeah.
Exactly. And one thing I will say that, you know, I'm very critical of Cisco because I feel like I need to be, right? That I'm the line of defense between what gets developed and what makes it to the customer. But I was very, very, very pleased with how they went about SecureX. They didn't charge for it. They recognized that we needed to find a way to do right by the customers that were already consuming multiple products of ours, and they made it open, right? So it's not locked down to Cisco. And these are some of the things that I'll show you. But going back to what I said earlier, you know, about the timeline, you know, we went through a tear starting right about here in terms of what we were looking to do in the security space. And this is about $6 billion worth of acquisition, development in-house, and integration. And this doesn't even include all the work that was done from a third-party perspective. So making sure that our I'll give you an example, making sure firepower can share information with other tools that don't belong to Cisco that we know exist in a lot of our organizations from a security perspective, right? Most people these days are coming off of that best of breed and slowly morphing to something that looks like, you know, still a multi-vendor solution, but a lot more of each vendor, whether it's at the edge or whether it's inside the network. And they're doing that for one reason. When you have best of breed, you have CrowdStrike on the endpoint, you have Zscaler on the edge, you have Palo Alto at the edge of the network, and you may have, you know, ClearPass as your AAA. The one bad thing about that is it really gets hard to hunt down threats when you have a lot of best of breed, but they don't necessarily share information easily because they're not open. And so that was another thing that Cisco saw in the market. You know, we're willing to open up our APIs and share information because we feel that makes the solution as a whole better for our customers. So what we came out with SecureX was this dashboard here. And I'll show you this live in a moment. And this dashboard is our unified visibility. It's cloud native, so there's no need to run an appliance. It is built on a microservices environment. So even the UI that you see for it is a client talking to another API within the microservice of SecureX. So it's highly extensible. And that's one of the things I like about it. And so when you look over here onto the right, you'll see that we have third-party integrations with ITSM, you know, third-party integration with intelligence. If you want to connect this to ServiceNow, share information between ServiceNow and SecureX, you can. From an intelligence perspective, if you want to hook up VirusTotal to this so that VirusTotal becomes one of the enrichment points. And that's a word you'll hear me say a lot, enrichment. And what I mean by enrichment is a single product, let's say Firepower, may give you an event. And that event may be some type of URL event, or it can be some type of intrusion event. And that is a single observable. And so at that point, you're just looking at a single event within a single product, but you might want to know, okay, I have these other products. What does it think about what I'm seeing in Firepower? And that's where we get into enrichment of data. And so I'll show you how we do that with something called SecureX Threat Response, where we take a single piece of data from one product and we bring it all together through API aggregation and map it out to show you, hey, Umbrella sees this, but here is what AMP is seeing. And then we just continue to add data. And that works as a quick way to get a better feel for what you're dealing with and how you're going to look to mitigate it. So from the SecureX standpoint, we look at the network, endpoints, applications, and cloud. So from the network standpoint, we just talked about Stealthwatch. It's got integration. ICE will become integrated once we develop and really put into general availability the PX cloud to make sure we can share information to a cloud native application. From the endpoint perspective, we have advanced malware protection as well as email security tied in. From the cloud perspective, we have Cisco Umbrella, formerly OpenDNS, tied in so we can see dispositions on different DNS related information. And then we also have applications, right? So there are a ton of other applications that exist that we can get information from to provide this dashboard of data that makes it easy to visualize what's going on in your network, as well as provide a path towards resolution. And so where we're at with this and what we're targeting security ops, we're targeting IT ops, and we're targeting net ops. And for the vast amount of my customers, they kind of fall in net ops. I do have some customers that really do have SecOps, but a lot of folks kind of wear multiple hats. And so this is another reason why SecureX is such a wonderful product, because if you're wearing multiple hats as a net ops person, you might not have all the time and the effort available to start really nose diving into products. So you need a way to do quick integrations and quick discovery. And that's what SecureX will do for you. So we already talked about the fact that this is included in every security product with Cisco. So whether you have one product from Cisco or 5, 6, 7 products from Cisco, you will get the ability to leverage SecureX. And then you will just go simply to, I think it's security.cisco.com. I believe, don't quote me on that, but I believe that is the URL to get started. You can actually really get this integrated into your applications in 15 minutes or less. I did this on my own home integration. It literally took a couple minutes. And the reason why, everything is done through an API key. You go to your application, let's say a Cisco Umbrella, formerly OpenDNS, you request an API key, you go to SecureX, you put it in, you add that module, and you're done. And then from there, you can always call on Umbrella through Cisco, Umbrella through SecureX. And what you'll get is there's 12 products and a total of 60 tiles. So depending on the product, it may have 6 or it may have 8 or 10 options in terms of what you can visualize as data points within the dashboard. And it saves time, right? So the visibility all in one is a crucial time saver. And I'm not just saying this because I'm at Cisco. I actually do have a few SecOps folks that I've worked with, and they were consumers of our security EAs, and they were running ETA, they were running Firepower, they had AMP. And when I showed them SecureX, they lost their mind because they said, finally, Cisco did what I needed them to do in terms of bringing these products together. So SecureX up front, I'll offer this because this is usually a question that I get. Is it a SIM? It is not a SIM. So SecureX is not a replacement for QRadar or Splunk or I think it's the Alien Vault or any of the other SIMs out there. SecureX can integrate with them. So as long as there is a module built already, or as long as they have some type of HTTP gateway that we can reach and, create an API to pull data and share it back and forth, we can work with any of those vendors. From the standpoint of what is SecureX, it's more like a SOAR in terms of what it does for you. It's based around security, it's based around orchestration, it's based around automation, and it's based around visibility. So we already talked about the integrations. This part here I'll show you, but we talked a little bit earlier about the fact that I can take data from application to application to application, and that's because of the ribbon. So when you have SecureX and you have it integrated to multiple security products, there's a ribbon that will appear at the bottom of each console. And that way, if I start an investigation on an observed data point in one security product, I can quickly move with single sign-on to another security product that's integrated, and that information will follow me. So if I'm building a casebook, if I am a security operations person, I can do so. The dashboard is highly customizable, and it's a drag and drop GUI for the orchestration, and we'll touch a little bit on that. So this is my last slide, and then we'll get into the demo. So this is the architecture. One of the cool things about SecureX is whether or not you are a Duo customer, we're providing Duo MFA for you. So if you are going to leverage SecureX, you're going to get access to Duo MFA for SecureX. So not only are we providing the security dashboard that links to everything else, but we're actually giving you an additional layer of security to access it. One question that often comes up is, well, I don't want anyone to be able to, hack into my web console for SecureX and be able to do things to my my other products. And the one thing to note, SecureX is not a place where you're going to do any administration. It's visibility, it's research, it's customizable fields. If you still needed to go in and augment a access control list on a firewall, or you needed to go in and do some deeper investigation, querying files on an endpoint, you're still going to cross-launch into those particular consoles, but you'll still have the ribbon. So there's no need to worry about what gets accessed in SecureX, because on the back end, whatever your profiles, your administrative rights for these independent applications are, that's what's going to rule. So there's no need to worry about someone getting to SecureX and then turning my network upside down on the firewall. And so as I said earlier, on the right, SecureX cross launches into Cisco products if necessary. And these apps are across all Cisco security products. And we share a lot of information, local context, intelligence, and then back and forth from an orchestration perspective, we can set up responses and triggers. So maybe there is an event from an email security perspective that drops an email into a group mailbox, and maybe it's after hours where this happened. Well, you can say that anytime that a email of a suspicious file or what have you comes into that email box, we're going to kick off and trigger some type of automation orchestration event. And that could end up with, sending something to our sandbox threat grid, all the way down to automating a message on the actual, on what that sandbox outcome was to a Slack, a WebEx Teams, a Microsoft Teams. Why? Because it's all API based. And these are just Python scripts and modules. So there's nothing hidden here. As long as you can write it and script it, and there is some type of HTTP endpoint, we can get to it. And like I said earlier, we have third-party integrations with either open APIs or the relay modules. that provides us context and intelligence. So we're getting it on both sides. So now we will move to the live demo. So let me get out of this. And AJ, while you're while I'm doing this, was there any questions that were popping up?
Well, you were helping me out when I was presenting, so now I'm helping you out.
Okay.
There was a question regarding GA for ICE integration, but we just found out that it's slated for first half of calendar year 21.
Oh, nice! I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't either.
Is that around that's around the PX Cloud, right? That's when that's available.
Believe so. Yeah, I don't know if that was it definitively, but what I saw so far was ICE integration in SecureX first half of 2021.
Perfect. All right, I'm almost done launching the demo. Just let me get a couple screens going here. Well, heck, let me just go ahead and share my screen.
Thanks for answering questions in the chat too, Jason.
So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen for the hell of it. And let me magnify this just a little bit because I know I tend to look at things a little small. How's that view?
The window itself is a little small. Yeah, there you go. If you could keep making that a little bigger.
How's this?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay.
So let me just go ahead. 16 by 9. Very 16 by 9.
Oh man, that's funny. And let me do umbrella. And then we'll get back to SecureX. So there's a lot of information on this screen. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to touch on this kind of left to right. So let me just close these, make it easier to see. So when you get SecureX, it comes with a couple preloaded applications. First is the threat response, and I'll cover threat response, but this is the API aggregation. So this is where you want to move to an investigation and you say, hey, Umbrella saw one thing, and now I want to look at what another application thinks about what Umbrella saw. And you want to start stitching it together through your different security apps. So that's what threat response is, and I'll show you what that looks like. And threat response was actually the beginning of SecureX. So they think threat response was about a year ahead of SecureX. The next thing is the Security Services Exchange. So I said earlier that the integration to applications for SecureX, it was via APIs. That is true, but there are certain applications that are on-prem today, one of them being Stealthwatch Enterprise, that not only requires a API integration, but there's a token that you need to use for the Security Services Exchange. It just basically takes 1 step to 2 steps. Still, you're talking about something that takes less than 5 minutes to do. So those are the embedded applications that you'll always see if you jump into SecureX. And then you have your integration. So under my integrations, these are all the products that are integrated into this instance of SecureX. So I have the ability to see any information from any of these products within this dashboard. And we'll talk a little bit about this dashboard in a few moments. And under available integrations, this is where you'll see the list of not only Cisco, maybe a Cisco product that you're not using, but you'll also see all the different third-party integrations. And this is going to grow over time. They came out the gate really quickly with a lot of different integrations. And I know they're working feverishly on some of the more prominent ones. But as you can see, there is a long list of integrations. And one of the ones that I believe is pretty cool. I think Virus Total is pretty cool. A lot of my customers use that to just do some more investigation on something when they actually get a threat that they're working on. So that's the left side of the pane. As we come across the top, of course, we're at the dashboard, but you can also look at the integration modules once again in a different view. So basically, I'm looking at the same information that I looked at on the dashboard, but I'm looking at it in a little bit more of a descriptive view. And as well as you can see all of the available integrations. Coming back to the dashboard, we'll scroll over to the right-hand side. So the right-hand side is the news feed. And I think this is pretty cool. And another thing you can do is you can get these out of the way if you want to look at things larger. But the news feed is really cool. So right now, the news feed is pretty static in terms of what it provides. But where this is headed past the static news feed, which includes Cisco security announcements, as well as Talos. If you're not familiar with Talos, Talos is the largest non-government threat research organization, and they are part of Cisco. And they are researchers that do hunting down of threats. They do a lot of open source work where they're submitting information and product in open source. So they still maintain Snort from an open source perspective. So there's a lot of good things happening with Talos, and that'll appear over here, just like this link here for Talos Intelligence, as well as the US CERT. But where we're headed with the news feed is that we're going to publish events to the news feed. So maybe there has been an event with your next generation firepower edge device. Well, we'll publish that as a news event here, and we'll label it. And this is all about, those three things I talked about: customizability, visibility, and time to resolution, right? So the faster I can visualize and act on a threat, the faster I am towards being able to resolve it. So in the middle, we have the dashboard, and the dashboard is customizable. And I'll move the news out of the way just so we can get a little bit more room here. So the dashboard is customizable up to 5 different dashboards. So typically what we see is, from a Cisco perspective, we kind of think of it as IT ops, SecOps, which you see right there, and NetOps. But this could be anything you want. So let's just take a look at how we can customize it. So we've got our NetOps, but what if I wanted to do a new dashboard? And I wanted to name that dashboard Endpoints. All right. I could name it Endpoints, and I could just come in here and I can pick some different dashboards that I want to see. Maybe I want to see something from my email security. So let's pick incoming email summary. And let's go down and take a look at Stealthwatch. Since Stealthwatch was just talked about, let's look at our network visibility, as well as top 10 host groups. And I'll just call this my endpoints. I'll click save. And so now this is a dashboard specifically created by me for endpoints. And the cool thing about this dashboard is, of course, as you can imagine, I can move things around. I can resize them if I want. Highly customizable. You can then come here and you can actually toggle the time interval either on the dashboard dashlet itself, or you can come up here and kind of look at the time frame, and it'll tell you, okay, out of all the dashlets that you have here, 4 of the 6 can go back as far as 7 days. So if I change that to 7 days, now I see I have a different look. I got some more data, demo data. And So that's it for the dashboard. As you can see here, if you wanted to get a view of what this API call looked like, we'll show you what that API call looks like in case you wanted to use it in a different place. Maybe you're building your own type of script and you wanted to leverage that. We'll share that with you. But if I go to NetOps, and let's see what's in NetOps. Is there any good information here? Cool. Yeah, there's some information here. So one thing about the NetOps is you can see that not only do you have the dashboard, but you also have the ability to launch from the dashboard into said product. So if I clicked on this link, it would take me directly to my Umbrella console. So going back to what I said earlier, from the standpoint of what we're doing here, this is not meant to be your administrative console. This is meant to be more of your, data center, SOC, visibility tool that starts your visibility as well as some of your investigations if necessary. So let's go down and take a look at the ribbon. So we talked a little bit about the fact that, when you are working on something, you're in one console and maybe you want to take whatever that observable was and you want to move it to another console. So that's what this ribbon is about. This ribbon, it gives you a list of all the different incidents. And let me just back out first and show you. The ribbon itself has applications. So the ribbon itself includes a casebook in case you wanted to start a case, you wanted to do an investigation, and you're 5 minutes before going off shift and you want to hand over to the next guy coming in, but you want to give him all the information that you picked up on. That's where the casebooks come into play. And then you can share with other team members, as well as you can look at incidents, which we were just at. And then there's Orbital. So Orbital, if you're not familiar with Orbital, it is tied to our advanced malware protection application. And think of it as kind of like SQL Lite. So Orbital exists as an operating system query tool. So with Orbital, you can do SQL-like queries on things operating system related with an endpoint using our AMP product. As well as you can see all the different applications that are integrated. So if I come back over here to incidents, I can look and see that, I have this particular incident that is a URL incident with my next generation firewall. I can see here that, it was the reporting device was the next generation firewall. I get a reporting device ID in a production environment. This would probably look a lot more specific. But if we go to targets, we can see the actual IP being targeted. And under observables, this is where I was kind of headed with, there are always things that we observe in certain security applications. What if this URL that we're observing as suspicious, what if I wanted to, say, for instance, find out what other products thought about this URL or any of the information with it? I can do that. I can assign this to myself. And so now this becomes my investigation. I can change the status from new to open. We'll keep this as open. And for right now, what I'm going to do is one, prove to you that I can see this on each of the other tools. So this is Umbrella. Here's AMP. You'll see I have the ability to look at this information in AMP. So this is what I was saying about being able to take an investigation that may start in SecureX or it may start in Umbrella and quickly move through all the different applications that are integrated with SecureX and where you can start sharing this information so that when you move from one console to the next, you're taking the information with you. It makes it really easy. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up an investigation. And so earlier I talked a little bit about something called SecureX threat response. And so while SecureX is your visibility, you still need a way to do like your investigation. And so that's what this is. So I'm going to click investigate this incident and I'm going to cross my fingers and hope this works. So what's happening right now over here is it's taking the data that was part of that investigation. So you see here the URL, you're seeing the targets, and what it's doing is it is taking that and enriching it. And what I meant, and what I said earlier about enrichment of data is it's going to say, hey, you know what? You have other security products that we can ask what they think about this data. And so what it then does is it provides a graph. And so now I can look at the data that I asked for enrichment on. And so you see here, this anything with a magnifying glass, that's where my investigation started. So my investigation started with this IP and this suspicious URL. And so now I'm seeing that there are some other endpoints out here that may be affected by this. And so it's giving me a little bit more data now. It just came through. And so if I go to the top here, these were my targets, right? So these are the things that you see in purple. The IP address and this Windows 10 machine. These were my observables. If you remember correctly, when we go back to SecureX, my observables were here, 2 IP addresses and a suspicious URL. So that's what's popping up here. And then I have what, we would consider indicators of compromise, just security events that will cause, bring attention to something going on that you might want to investigate. And here I have the IP addresses associated with this investigation, and then my one suspicious URL. But more importantly, it'll show you what modules that it queried, right? So if you go back, we started this with a next generation firewall incident. And since that point in time, I took one click and I was able to find out not only what the next generation firewall saw with this incident, but it gave me private intelligence through a third-party integration. It let me know what AMP for Endpoints saw. It gave me Stealthwatch enterprise sightings, as well as Umbrella. And so what we see here now is we have an SHA-256 hash that is unknown. So everything that's in the that is gray is an unknown element. But for whatever reason, my investigation using all the modules has shown me that, I might need to take a look at these things. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this SHA-256 hash and I'm going to add this to my existing investigation. So here I have my 3 observables from the beginning at SecureX that I got from the next generation firewall. Now I'm going to combine that information with this SHA-256 hash and say, hey, okay, now that I know I have this, let's add it to my investigation and tell me what you find. And then if this demo works properly, we'll see that the relational graph will get larger. And so now I know that not only do I have that information that I started out with, I know I have 6 targets now, right? I have another Windows 10 machine, I have the IP addresses, and I have some email addresses. So this is telling me that whatever is going on with this SHA-256 hash, it has something to do with a file that came through email because my email picked that up. And so now I have 4 observables because I've added the SHA-256 hash. And if I come over to the modules, I have 9 modules now that are involved in the enrichment of this data. And as you can see, one of them that wasn't there before was my email security appliance. And we see here that we have some targeted email. So let me move this over a little bit. And so you can see we have our targeted email. We have our message. All of these are part of this SHA-256 hash file that we got from AMP. So this is kind of to recap. This is how quickly you're able to start at SecureX with visibility, find something that is interesting, maybe something that is considered an incident, add that to an investigation, add it to your casebook, bring other folks in to help, and then share that small piece of information with other products, and then get a better holistic picture of what might be happening with that from an investigation standpoint. So from an anecdotal perspective, I shared this with a customer of mine about, I don't know, 6 months ago, before SecureX was made generally available. And this guy was a security operations guy. He literally lost his mind. Like he's like, wait a minute, I can do all of this in one spot. And I said, yeah. And he said, and I don't have to pay for this, because threat response is an entitlement as well. If you have AMP, if you have next generation firewall, if you have Umbrella, threat response and SecureX are yours. You just need to log on and set it up and add your modules, and you're good to go. And it was a very happy customer, and he's using it to this day. And what he told me was it helps him when the CIO comes in and shows him a website and says, I saw this threat on, blah, blah, blah website. Are we protected by it? And so these are some of the tools that he uses to make sure it's not floating around in their environment. So the last thing I wanted to show you guys, and this is something that, I'll be very honest, I'm not all completely up to speed with yet, but we have this idea of orchestration, and I touched on it a little bit earlier. So what orchestration is supposed to provide as value is that you may want to automatically do some things based off of event triggers. And so I'll show you this really simple one that makes it easy for me to explain. Maybe you have a URL that's suspicious, and maybe you want to automate how you actually treat suspicious URLs. With this automation orchestration tool within SecureX, you can actually kick that off as an event-driven service. So meaning that it shows up as an observable, it starts, and if it's no, it completes. But if it is still looked at as suspicious or is looked at as malicious, it will run through these atomic workflows and actually do everything that you've drag and dropped in here to do, as well as at the end, post any information that you need to some type of messaging room, whether that's WebEx Teams, Microsoft Teams, Slack, you name it. As long as it's an API available to get information to it, you can do it. And as you see on the right-hand side here, we have the ability to schedule these things, add conditions. So like I said, I don't have the full scope of the capabilities, but when I talk to the TMEs, they say that this is pretty much like the gold standard in terms of automation and orchestration, because it's limitless. If you can write it in Python, if we have an adapter for it and it has an HTTP endpoint, you can do whatever you want with a simple drag and drop of these, they call them atomic actions. I don't know what the hell that means, but so you simple drag and drop, right? So this is SecureX. I would implore anyone that if you have a security product that you purchased recently from Cisco and you are not using SecureX and you're not using SecureX Threat Response, go ahead, log in, try it out, add your module. It's free. It's an entitlement to you, and it's only going to get better. We're not stopping here. What I'm more in anticipation of is this news feed, as well as what we end up doing here with the ribbon. But I think one of the things that I'll leave you with is, Cisco really did the right thing by our customers by developing this product and making it an entitlement and not putting any charges around it. And they're full 100% development into this product. It's cloud native, so there's no appliances, there's no licenses. You just log on. And that's all I've got. So if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to answer any questions. Do we still have people out there?
Good job, man. I always learn something when I'm in a WebEx with you.
Likewise, my friend, likewise. So everybody's quiet. Do we have any questions at all? How about your honest to God thoughts?
We've got something in the chat that said it was very cool.
Awesome. Thanks.
Wait, there's no license for this?
So the good thing is the license for this, is there any ICE integration yet? I'll answer that just in just a moment. So the good thing is the license for this is the license for the product you are buying. So once you buy that product, that license for that product, and as long as you have it, entitles you to this ICE integration. So the one thing about ICE that we know is it is an on-prem product. And while it does share information, that information is shared on-prem as well. And so one of the things that we are developing is PX Cloud. So if you're familiar with PX Grid that AJ touched on in one of his earlier slides, PX Grid, which is known as Platform Exchange Grid, is the way we share information between Cisco security products as well as third parties. So we do have third parties that are leveraging PX Grid. And in order to get ICE information, contextual information into SecureX, we have to develop a cloud version of it because SecureX is a microservice API-driven application. And so the only way to really talk to it is to have some conduit that is more native to its language. So ICE integration is not here today, but I would expect that it's going to be here fairly soon based on everything I'm hearing around the development of PX Cloud. So I'm assuming that will happen sometime in the next 6 months.
Thanks, Ray.
No problem. And Ying Yu, you said you've been using this for a while?
Yes. We get it from our AMP subscription.
Oh, okay. Okay. And so your honest thoughts on it.
It's pretty cool. I mean, eventually we might actually add more security product to it because we did a POC with the Cisco team with the Stealthwatch, like the on-prem one. That's pretty cool. I mean, like, but we gotta upgrade our infrastructure first because, like, the NetFlow, some of the older switches won't even support it. So we are doing like hardware first and then software. We're in the process of doing like about 760 Meraki MV camera. And then we're doing the 9300. I think the first batch is about 250 9300.
Oh, awesome. Okay. There you go. So
once we get the 9300 in place, and then NetFlow is not going to be a problem.
Yeah, gotcha. Gotcha. That's good to know. Like I said, you know, and AJ will attest to this. I'm not opposed to calling my baby ugly, but it's been all good with SecureX. It's just a matter of time, and it's a matter of you know, and getting the right products together that fit your needs, and then getting it leveraging SecureX, and then figuring out which third parties. I mean, I can tell you that Splunk has been something that they've been getting asked about for a while. I'm not sure what the holdup is on that, but I would expect that that's going to be something that it's high on their list in terms of integration.
Yeah, but using ICE will be pretty awesome because the ICE we also have ICE in our environment. So having all those extra information in SecureX, that would basically solve a lot of problems. So you don't have to go back and forth, to ICE to try to look up an endpoint.
Yep, absolutely correct. So, and I don't know if you guys listened to the Cisco earnings report today, but that's one of the things that Cisco is heavily working towards is getting things in the cloud and getting things to a point where they mean more to the organization than the single thing that they do. Meaning that, we take things like best of breed, Thousand Eyes for network visibility, and then layering that with App Dynamics, which is best of breed for application performance and visibility. And now, once you know that you can look at a mobile device that's having some errors on a back-end SQL, you can see, well, is it the network? Is it how they're getting to my API gateway? What is it? And so those are the things that we're working on at Cisco and with a cloud-first mentality. Well, cool, gentlemen. I appreciate your time. I think we can stop the recording now.
Yeah.